So what I think I see, gold seems to be getting legs. It could just be be slowly but surely working its way into meme stock status, right? It could be that we're gonna have the batshit crazy phase, and then it's just gonna collapse. Who knows? I'm enjoying it. To truly correct the valuations, you not only have to drop 60 or 70%, you have to not then spike back up, or you've achieved nothing. If you want to understand the world that we're looking at, I think you have to come at it from a different angle. When Matt Taibbi was investigating the world in 07, 08, 09, and he had gone from being just some reporter to the vampire squid guy, there was a critical moment where someone said, "You're treating this wrong. It's not a financial problem. It's a crime problem."
Hey guys, welcome to Capital Cosm. Today we've got Dave Collum back on the show. Dave, thanks for coming back on, my friend.
It's my pleasure. Always fun.
Hey, so let's just dive right in, Dave. What is your general prognosis of the market as a whole at the moment? Gold is making all-time highs almost every other day now. Oil shooting up to $86, $87. What's going on in the markets, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I have made a written case that we're going to have 40 years of pain. I think this is going to be one of these real long cycle feast famine, and we're going to enter the famine phase. Don't know when. People say, well, if you don't know when, it doesn't do me any good. I go, if I told you a train was coming, would you camp on the tracks even if you didn't have the train schedule? The answer is no. I think what I am seeing, first of all, I think the inflation numbers are a crock.
Oh, the 3.5%?
Yeah, I don't, and the PCE crap that the Fed uses and stuff like that. So I talk to guys like Jimmy Iorio, who owns a restaurant, and things like that. And they just tell a very different story. Our own intuition tells a different story, but sometimes it's, we all have a different inflation number because, someone might have a rent that's going up and I don't. Someone might have a mortgage that's a floater. I don't. So my inflation is food and, heating bills and things like that. So mine's different than theirs. It's about as unique as our TikTok feed. But I think inflation is somewhere between what they say and John Williams of ShadowStats numbers. His numbers don't make sense to me now, I've realized, either. But if that's the case, then we're getting more crushed by inflation than the official numbers say.
Why don't his numbers make sense to you? And FYI, his numbers are typically double what the official rate is.
Yeah. Someone convinced me of this. If you actually take his numbers and you propagate them over 20 years or something. So if you look at where the ShadowStats numbers deviate from the CPI, say over the last 20 years, it's been about 5% higher. If you then do the math and say, therefore, how much should a car cost? How much they explode too much. And so I think his numbers, all you have to do is be off by 1% or 2%. And the explosion occurs. And so I think his numbers compound wrong. Butowski, who runs Chapwood Index, his numbers are exceedingly high too. And so there's something to these numbers, but what I can tell you is that 20 years ago, cars did not cost 1/5 of what they cost now. That's the kind of thing you come up with. And so somewhere between what we're told and what they say, I think is the right answer. I just don't know where it is, but it's more painful. I'm not convinced you can inflate away debt. I'm not. I think it's like the phrase "picking up by your bootstraps," right? If you think about what that phrase means, you're pulling on your own bootstraps, trying to lift yourself up. And so there's a kind of a paradoxical quality where I think the idea of trying to inflate away debt just creates more inflation.
Yeah,
and so I don't know how to do it. I think in the end you end up with essentially a deflationary collapse. But it's hard to picture. I'm kind of building this plane in flight like everybody else. And so what I think I see, gold seems to be getting legs. It could just be slowly but surely working its way into meme stock status, right? It could be that we're gonna have the batshit crazy phase, and then it's just gonna collapse. Who knows? I'm enjoying it because I was buying gold from 270 up. I was buying silver at 480 an ounce. So the little bumps and stuff that look painful to nouveau gold bugs, I don't like them, but I still say, look, I'm up X percent, where X is a very large number. It's been a great year for my portfolio. I mean, I'm doubling the S&P, for example, and that's good. But it could be taken away so quickly because these markets are so emergent. What I think I see are all these indicators that people are not putting together that all look like they're rolling over to me. So there'll be some sort of particular employment metric where all of a sudden, unemployment claims are starting to creep up, or housing inventory starting to creep up, and so the things that by themselves you might not even notice, but you go, look, every single one of these things is, so I've got hundreds and hundreds of plots showing something rolling over, something starting to climb. And so I think the shit's slowly but surely hitting the fan. In March of 2007, I had been obsessing over how the housing market, everything held together. I could not understand it. Housing market had turned over by 2006. It was about March of 2007, a little bit later, I think, where the market ABX derivative index started to break away from par. It was flatlined, and then all of a sudden it starts trickling down a little bit. And I go, what's that? There's a woman named Tanta writing about it. So I said to my class, literally in March of 2007, I think the banking system's about to collapse. And they looked at me like I came from Mars, right? What are you talking about? I go, I'm just telling you, I think I've heard an audible crack in the system. And then ironically, I had that same group 2 years later. So it was February of 2009. Now put yourself what that felt like. All hell was breaking loose, right? Just explosions everywhere. And I had the same group in honors senior thesis. And the first day of class, I said, didn't I tell you that the banking system was going to collapse? And they said, yes, you did. And I said, did any of your econ professors tell you that? They said, no, because a lot of them double major. And I said, what are those assholes paid for? So I had as my first guest lecture, which you often do in this course, was the CEO of Morgan Stanley Bank to talk about it. And he had personally cut his teeth on mortgage-backed securities when he was younger. And he left Morgan Stanley Bank, the banking subsidiary of Morgan Stanley, got him Rich Ulig. And he talked about the chaos. He talked about how he had built a portfolio that was 2 million fold leveraged. And he said, then all of a sudden they started showing up everywhere. And he said, it just terrified me. And he left in 2006. He said, I got to get out. What I failed to do was see $30 trillion of bailout. I just would have never believed they would do that. I was aghast at 30 billion when they bailed out Bear Stearns, when they dealt with Bear Stearns, and that's chump change, right? That's quarters between your seat cushions now. So,
yeah, I was just reading a story on Bloomberg. It says the FDIC chief is ready for a major Wall Street bank collapse should it ever happen. So, which tells me that they're expecting it to happen if they're kind of started to kind of bring it out there.
Well, I think we have to, right? I mean, I think we've reached a point where, Jesse Felder yesterday I was listening to him, said that the Mag 7 collectively was trading at 50 times free cash flow. And these are the 7 stocks that are carrying the entire market. And so in the idea of a narrow market, you can't get narrower than that, I don't think. And so I don't think there's a shred of historical precedent for anything but a bad next downturn. And meanwhile, people are talking about soft landings or no landings. And as I've pointed out on Twitter, usually just to entertain myself, I said, look, in bull markets during good times, no one talks about landings. If you're flying over the Andes, they start talking about a landing. I don't care if they say it's going to be a soft one. They don't talk about landings. They don't talk about landings until the engines are on fire.
Yeah, yeah, and they don't talk about major banks going under either.
Right. So there's all these little things that are by themselves seemingly not that threatening, but you may or may not recall, you're pretty young. The first crack in the 07 problem, the first audible crack, was the Bear Stearns internal hedge funds. The Bear Stearns internal hedge funds, at first they said, well, you know, there's $600 million. I go, who cares, right? But somehow that really was, that was like, and how they saved the banking crisis last spring is a little mysterious to me, how they actually retrieved the regional banks from going through a cascading failure. I don't know how they did that, actually. We had huge bank failures, but only 4 of them.
Yeah,
that's not normal.
The FDIC,
that's not normal.
Yeah, the FDIC only has about $150 billion in its treasure chest.
Yeah, that's like being insured by your teenage son.
Which is nothing. I mean, that's not even the market cap of a Max 7 stock.
No, not even close.
So Powell came out the other day saying that we're starting to pump out rumors that rate cuts might not be coming. In point of fact, might be rate hikes that are down the pike here. Can the Fed actually raise rates in this environment, do you think? You know, considering all we've kind of talked about so far, or is this kind of just more? Is this their way of trying to stop this commodity supply side inflation that we're kind of starting to see the early signs of?
Well, so I have been the underdog contrarian in several fairly visible situations, a couple of panel discussions, a couple of years in a row, of being the guy who thinks Powell's got more balls than people think, that he's an elderly gentleman who's looking at his legacy, and that he does not want to be Arthur Burns. He wants to be Paul Volcker, maybe. And that they say, no, he's just a puppet. He's just a blah, blah, blah. And I go, you know, I'm not sure. And then they say he's just going to do it because Biden administration. I go, I think he must be pissed off at the Biden administration right about now, too. because they're making it impossible to get control of the inflation.
Biden just said the other day that to expect rate cuts this year, kind of going contradictory to what Powell said.
I know. Well,
he's kind of pushing him.
But Biden said that before Powell said it. So Biden's first, and he said it with this like nasty little smirky grin when he first said it. Remember, he says, "There's got to be rate cuts." I know, you know, and I'm going.
He said it was a month delayed, but there is going to be a rate cut. And then the day later, Powell said what he said about rate hikes.
Right.
So it kind of tells me that there's this.
Well, I tweeted that Biden just guaranteed there couldn't be a rate cut. I tweeted that Biden guaranteed there couldn't be a rate cut by saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Powell could not go cut rates after Biden said that. And so I would think Powell would hate Biden. I would think he would really detest Biden. Right now, they used to talk about help from fiscal policy, meaning pumping up the economy with money. Now they need help from fiscal policy, quit squandering hundreds of billions of dollars on causes that make no sense. And so like climate change and Ukraine and things like that. And so I would think that Powell would in no way give a shit about helping Biden, although he might hate Trump enough and he might be fearful of Trump enough. But, you know, on Trump's watch, they didn't have that much trouble. So.
Who, with the Fed?
Yeah, the Fed didn't have to dodge. You know, Trump at times tried to bully him a little and, you know, to pump the market. That's the thing I found most problematic with Trump's presidency, actually, was his emphasis on the stock market.
Yeah. I mean, he's not an Austrian economist by any stretch of the means.
No, not a bit. No, he's the Donald Trump. You know, his narcissism has not waned. I mean, but I think it's matured. So I refer to it as weaponizing narcissism. I think Trump has realized that, I mean, he used to just want to put his name on buildings and stuff and be grandiose. He's a grandiose narcissist, it's called. I think he realized that to truly achieve his narcissistic nirvana, he has to actually be a great president.
Yeah.
He has to actually achieve something. And so I think that this idea of, truly getting control of the borders now and truly getting control of things and truly pulling us back from World War III. And I think he realizes to be one of the greats, he's got to actually stop us from driving off a cliff. And that's why I'm optimistic at some level.
Yeah. I mean, desire and capability are two different things. He may want to do that, but given how his first term went, I mean, he was pretty much handcuffed throughout his first term.
Yeah, but he knows where the spoons are now, right? So he entered the presidency, first of all, being shocked that he was there, so unprepared. And second of all, he had no idea who he could trust, so he had to bring in his family to run the operation. And he got criticized for it semi-legitimately, but also he had no idea who he could trust. He, I'm sure, now knows who he can trust. He will build what I call a war cabinet, but it's not going to be an international war cabinet. It's going to be a domestic war cabinet. He's going to surround himself with guys who are able to do battle with his opponents domestically.
Yeah, because that was the biggest problem with Trump in his first term was his personnel. Personnel was the main issue.
But I don't think he could control that. And like, for example, people say, well, look at Fauci. And I go, Fauci got deified. If he had tried to fire Fauci, he would have massacred if he tried to get rid of Fauci.
People often forget how tense it was back in 2020, like during the height of COVID.
Right.
Like this election season is pretty tame. Like there's not this huge vitriol of hate that there was in 2020.
It's not over.
Yeah, it's not over. But I mean, if you track it, year to date versus where we were at the same time in 2020, there's a lot more resentment, a lot more hate.
So here's my fear is that the guys, the bad guys, the US centric bad guys who want to fight World War III for some reason, I don't know why, but they seem determined to do it. It's possible that they are looking at the situation saying, look, Trump is going to get elected. Now, I can't rule out the possibility that they can rig it that much. What I have trouble fathoming is that Biden could actually win it legitimately. If you're voting for Biden, I vote for, write and vote for your dog. I would do it, anything, but voting for Biden strikes me as, and Trump supporters are truly loyal sort of supporters. Biden supporters are just, opposed to something. So I just don't think that's a winning strategy. And he's so doddering, he's so demented that if you vote for Biden and all the things that really are bad in the world, I think you've lost the plot. And so I don't see how Biden can win. Obama could beat Trump, for example. This is not a left-wing, right-wing thing. And so it's conceivable that they know Trump's going to win. So what do? Well, you try to do various things to tee it up so that you neuter him in advance. And one of the ways to do it is to get us into World War III before he takes office. So that's my darkest scenario right there.
Yeah, but I do have to give it to, I mean, as much as an American, but the Russians and the Iranians have been very tempered throughout this entire ordeal.
I've written dozens of pages, dozens and dozens. I wrote about Ukraine in 2022, and I write things that are varying degrees of useful. This was, I think, some of my best geopolitical writing. And what I did is I found probably 50 guys who were trying to really understand the Ukraine war, who had really dug into the coups from 2014 and all that crap, and the Azov battalion and the Nazis and all that stuff. And I dug deeply into it, and then I put the story together. They were not compiling the stories from each other. They were telling their part of the story, and I put it all together into this why Putin is not the problem. So I totally took Putin's side. I said, look, this is not Putin's cause. Putin was left an option. His best option was to move a force into Ukraine, that period. He blew it thinking that NATO would then back off and say, okay, never mind. I think that was a miscalculation. He then built a hell of an army, and he's now kicking the living shit out of Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians for no legitimate reason whatsoever. I don't think he wanted to kill Ukrainians. I don't think he wanted to destroy infrastructure. I think he wanted to say to NATO, you can't take control of Ukraine. It wasn't him taking control. It was NATO taking control. And I would debate anyone on it. And I would bring John Mearsheimer with me if I had to. But and I think Putin has been very measured. And by the way, he is one of the more impressive world leaders compared to the nitwits who are running. Now, who would you want to go against? Putin or Trudeau or Biden or Macron? Putin owns these bastards in terms of just being grounded as hell. Now he's a thug, I'm sure. He's a sociopath by Western standards. But Trudeau couldn't run Russia. And he's a sociopath by every standard. So there's that. You can't run Russia without being an unbelievably tough guy.
Yeah. The impression that I get from Putin is that he's a very pragmatic guy, very intelligent, very competent, but also he's a romantic. He romanticizes Russia and its history to the point where he's measured to an extent that we weren't as measured when we went to Iraq. You know, he's doing everything that he can.
Zero.
Yeah.
We were zero measured.
No temperance,
zero.
Nothing. So I mean, he's doing what he can to keep the casualties on the downside as much as
Although now I think he's fighting a pretty brutal war because we forced him to do it. We cornered him. We said, you're going to have to fight your way now. Now you're going to have to win big. And so he said, okay, we can do it that way. I mean, they're putting teenage chicks out on the front lines now. They have run out of people to die.
Yeah. Children and old men.
Yeah, the age is something like 12 to 70. And you look at the new recruits and you go, those are grizzled old bastards. These are not military age men anymore. And they've just run out. When I read somewhere that of the people who bolted out of Ukraine, 2 million went to Russia. Right? The story we've got in the Western press about Ukraine is such a pack of lies, in my opinion. It's not to say Russia's not working the media, right? They certainly are. If they're not, then Putin's dumber than I think. But I've been watching Putin with interest for a dozen years, and I find him to be incredibly coherent. Not necessarily a nice guy.
Yeah, two different things.
Well, different things.
Let's bring it back to monetary metals now. The gold price is shooting up. You mentioned that earlier in the talk here. What does this portend to the markets? What does this portend to the world as a whole? Gold goes up. It's typically a leading indicator for inflation, crisis, etc.
Well, I get confounded by all that stuff because sometimes it just goes up and goes down for no reason, right? So it's odd for me, for example, that the gold miners are sucking so bad. You know, somehow that there should be, the gold miners should be responding, and I don't know why they're not. And to think anthropomorphically about the markets is probably the first mistake. To think that they should make sense. People who say higher interest rates are bad for gold are failing to notice two things. One is that higher interest rates and gold going up both are responses to inflation. So they really ought to correlate. And second of all, that if you look at history, they do correlate. And so this idea that if we hike rates, gold will get pummeled, you can say it if you want, but in short term, it might be true. But if we get a runaway inflation, I think gold probably will be okay. I think energy will be okay. I think stuff like that. So the one I'm watching and I'm waiting, I used to collect stamps when I was a kid. U.S. postage stamps. I was actually a pretty good collector for a kid. And so I sold my collection when I was 25 for like $1,400, which I collected from age 8 to 12. Right? That's a good collection. I have never seen a bear market like in the stamp world. You cannot find anyone who thinks the stamp world's anything but incomplete. And I'm not sure it'll ever come back. It might be it had its heyday. Platinum is in that world right now. Platinum is unloved. And that one I can make an argument. And the argument is that, first of all, there are hydrogen fuel cells that might use platinum. Second of all, the death of the internal combustion engine is probably premature. And if not, we're even more screwed, because if they really do send us all to electric cars, there are so many reasons why we are so screwed. That we better pray. We better pray that they let us use internal combustion engines, because the electric cars just aren't going to work. Not on the scale they want.
Why is that?
The grid can't handle it. Where do you get the energy from? They're not opening nuke plants. They're closing down coal-fired power plants. When are you going to charge your car at night? What are you going to do that with solar panels or wind? Right? Neither of which works at night. And so the grid, by the way, is fragile in a way that a lot of people don't know. They think about intermittent energy, meaning you can get it on a sunny day, but not on a quiet day. No, actually, the grid has a frequency to it, like a radio wave has frequency to it. And when you have a turbine at Niagara Falls whipping around, it is incredibly steady flow of energy. If that turbine was jiggling at all, it turns out it destabilizes the grid, but it doesn't. So coal plants, all these things produce a very steady, very constant frequency energy. Supposedly the Australians are learning this the hard way when they close down all their coal-fired power plants, despite the fact that they produce more coal than anybody, that you can only incorporate so much sort of alternative energy into the grid before it kind of breaks. You can kind of jerry-rig it to not screw up this balancing act of steady frequency. And then it just doesn't work. Now, maybe you can solve that technically, maybe you can, but and then it's just inefficient energy, right? One of the great correlations is the correlation of energy consumption with economic growth. And so if we really do go to inferior sources of energy, we are going to have inferior economic growth. And so the next absolutely most obvious move is nuclear. But the time scales of that are a disaster. And now all of a sudden I don't know what to take seriously, but they're talking about AI just sucking the life out of the energy system
through these data centers.
Yeah, and we know, and Bitcoin guys get hammered for sucking energy out, but one thing they're very good at doing is using energy that's not of much value. And so they're really not causing as much trouble. They try to make it sound like it's a good thing. I go, no, it just makes it cheaper. But Lynn Alden made one interesting argument for why it's actually a good thing. But the point is, we can't just run everything off the grid without it, based on the current grid. And are we going to have the capital to rebuild the whole grid? Are we going to have the leadership to rebuild the whole grid when you got nitwits who are going to ban everything that's a half-decent idea? And I'm a total climate denier at this point. I think the climate change narrative is pathetically wrong from head to toe. I don't think there's hardly a shred of truth in the whole story. There's nothing left in that story that gives me pause and makes me think, okay, maybe they have it right there. And there's nothing. I think the whole story is crap.
Well, what's one major counterpoint to the climate change narrative that comes top of mind?
Well, the first one I hit is the censorship component. And that is, they say there's no credible scientist who doesn't believe it. And it can take you, put in 2 or 3 hours of effort, you will find that there are Nobel Prize winning physicists all over the world who say it's crap. So right away, this idea that we all agree, so shut up and don't question it, is the first very big lie. And then you find out things like 97% consensus estimates are based on unbelievably, pathetically flawed polling system. And anyone who says climate change is not a problem goes unfunded for the rest of their scientific career. So you take out the counter argument. So it's a lot like COVID in that sense, right? The guys who said we shouldn't lock down, they got shut up as fast as possible. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem is that if you actually look at the data, you find things like the hurricane intensity, frequency anywhere is not increasing. It's just not increasing. You look at claims that the polar bears are starving. They've tripled since the 1970s. You look at burn acreage and you find that it's shrinking. You look at damage done by climate catastrophes, and it's up 97% in terms of human death due to climate change. So this idea that we're all going to die ignores the fact that over the 20th century we were able to reduce by 97% the human fatalities due to bad weather. And so there's just and if you look long term, it turns out it was one of the favorite pictures is a picture of the glaciers melting, right? And by the way, the total ice caps in the world are not dropping. They're just moving around. They just shift around. But you look at like the glaciers. Here's a glacier from 1921 and a glacier from 2021. You go look over 100 years. Look, the glacier has melted. Horror story. You can convince millions of morons that that's compelling evidence of climate change. I mean, it's very easy when you see that picture. You go, there it is, right in front of you. Any idiot can see that. You go, well, I should point out that what the glaciers melting have revealed are artifacts from indigenous people that are about 1,200 years old, and trees that were about 1,200 years old. And it turns out, therefore, 1,200 years ago, they were growing there. And therefore, that glacier receded after only 1,200 years. And the medieval warming period, it was hotter than it is now. So, everything grows better with CO2. They're just CO2's the global temperature responding to CO2 is very nonlinear. So you add more CO2, it becomes a law of diminishing returns very quickly. And on top of that, there's this phenomenal chart of 600,000 years of CO2 and temperature, which the correlation is fabulous. I mean, it's truly a fabulous correlation over 600,000 years from ice cores. It turns out that there's a statistically significant 800-year lag in that data. And it turns out that the Earth gets warm, and then with an 800-year lag, the CO2 appears. So the causality is temperature causes the CO2. Where? It degasses from the ocean.
I see. Here's another one.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, here's another one for you. So pre-industrial age, we started collecting temperature data about 100, 150 years ago through these weather stations, supposedly randomly distributed across the Earth, even though they're mainly biased towards the northern hemisphere. There's very little coverage, right, relatively speaking,
because
to the
that's where
hemisphere.
Civilization was, right? Civilization was in the northern hemisphere.
But so the way that they calculate these historical temperatures from a 10,000 year ago perspective, 100,000 million year ago perspective, is that they look at tree ring data.
Right. Dendrochronology.
Yep. But
I wrote a paper on that.
Interesting.
So, as a freshman.
So they looked at tree ring data from millions of years ago up until the mid 1800s. So that's how they extrapolate temperature. And then from the mid 1800s up until present day, they use weather station data to.
They also use bristlecone pine trees. trees.
Yeah, but the key, the big reveal is, once you're looking at apples to oranges comparison, right? Mm-hmm. You're using two different methodologies. But then if you use the same tree ring data that you use to extrapolate millions of years worth of temperature, and you use that from the 1850s up until today, it actually doesn't show any warming whatsoever that the weather station data shows.
Yeah, it was hotter in the 1930s than it is now in the United States, but there's no increase in frequency of any bad weather events. The IPCC is the Bible of the scientific literature. So about every 5 years, they put out a report and it compiles everything that they've learned. And there's two components. There's the scientific part, and then there's the geopolitical part. They really, I don't even think they talk to each other. And the scientific part, actually, if you read it, there's quite a bit of honesty in it. And they'll say the probability of sea level change being due to climate is low. They'll say that. The report says it. They'll say that there's no evidence of increased climate events because of climate change, because of CO2. That's in the report. This is the Bible. Al Gore's Nobel Prize, you could argue, is based on the fact he kept showing that hockey stick plot that showed this sort of spiking, I think it was CO2 levels. It turns out that was a fraud, complete fraud. The co-authors of the paper that published it, one of the guys said, I want to puke, right? Well, another said, you should retract this garbage. This is dribble. But that gets trotted out all the time as evidence we have climate change and CO2 problems, stuff like that. And so these same nitwits oppose nuclear. I'm really becoming impatient. I wrote about it again this year. I gave a talk on Tom Nelson's podcast, and he's been following this stuff for many, many years. And I said, do you know a solar physicist who buys the climate change narrative? He said, no. You can't get the solar physicists to sign off. You have a problem, right? These guys are pointing up to the big round sphere in the sky, which disappeared last week, earlier this week. And they say that's it. It's various sun cycles. That's why the temperature's changing. That's why the weather's changing. The sun, very predictable cycles too. And so there's all sorts of things, and there's almost nothing that holds up to scrutiny. And the community's very prone to stay silent, therefore sort of tacitly lying, and to cover up embarrassing things because it'll hurt the narrative and things like that. So it's a real bullshit rich field.
Historically speaking, there's only been 3 aspects that move temperature, and that is the sun, volcanic eruptions, and then the jet streams.
Right.
Those are the 3 main factors.
Someone point out something interesting. The poles, the true magnetic poles are moving towards each other. And they're doing so quickly now. Quickly as in like in a lifetime, measurably quickly. Not just quickly like over 10,000 years. And that apparently when there is a pole reversal, you get all sorts of bizarre events, which include the atmosphere somehow you lose the ability to filter cosmic rays coming in and stuff like that, and you a lot of skin cancer stuff and things like that. So if that pole reversal is happening, then that could be the monster event. But I think we're more likely to get wiped out by some EMP or something where it takes out our grid,
like a solar flare, like a Carrington event,
a natural one like that. What's it called? What was the event called in 1859?
Carrington event
for it. Carrington event, yeah. Carrington event, and that took out the telegraphs. And in 1859, telegraphs were like probably 1/4-inch copper cable, right? What's that going to do to a microchip if we have another one of those, right? And or some explosion from one of our foes, way up in the atmosphere, showering us with some sort of frequency crap that fries our system, fries our group. A friend of mine, a guy named David Tice, who was one of the most prominent bears in 1999, ran the Prudent Bear Fund. And he was the guy that CNBC would trot out to humiliate in 99 when everyone else was bullish. And he'd say, look, we're screwed. He produced a documentary with Dennis Quaid called Grid Down. I haven't seen it yet. I do have to see it. I'm not sure it's available yet, but I think so. Every fall I spend a couple hours with him at a meeting, and he's building a prepper community. He's convinced it's going to be better have guns, ammo, MREs, and better be able to live for a couple of years without depending on anybody.
Where's he building this community at?
Somewhere out west. I don't know in detail. He might say so in the movie, but my guess is the details are probably not broadly distributed because that would defeat the purpose at some level. But he's building a community that will have, Navy SEALs living there, guys who can do the tough part, and people who know how to grow food and stuff like that.
Interesting. Well, let's take it back to the commodity space really quick. Oil's hitting at $86, $87. I read this article from Bloomberg earlier today, and they say that political risk is not priced into $90 oil. Do you believe that?
I have no idea how to price oil. I remember when oil was 150 and some guy said it would drop to 35, and I thought he was nuts. And he was conservative, right? It got to negative 37. Some of that isolated oil, landlocked, negative 37. So I don't know how to price oil. All I know is that
But you're seeing oil rise in conjunction with gold.
I don't know if that's a good correlation or just what's happening right now. I don't have a good feel for it. There's so much of this stuff has to do with the trading world we live in, right? The price being determined in some futures market. And at some point, as you know, as I know, and I remember getting in an argument with a guy probably 20 years ago where he said the price is determined in the futures market. I said, no, but at the end of the day, they have to deliver. And he says, no, but the price is determined in the futures market. And I wasn't getting the message. The price is determined in the futures market right up until you get to the point where there's some default of some kind. Like, for example, if the futures market says silver's 25 and you simply can't provide silver at 25, then there's now a default COMEX or someplace like that. And so I think it's determined in the futures market until it's not. And then you find out it's like, bread in Russia costing 10 rubles, fine, but try to buy some, right? That sort of thing. So is the current run real, or is it just, commodity bulls getting enthusiastic again, getting ready to get knocked down again? I made a lot of money in the noughts by inflation hedging. At some level, dumb luck through fossil fuel based investments. And so I said, I want to hedge inflation. So I said, well, then I bought a bunch of Fidelity energy funds, for example, when they were way out of favor. And it wasn't brilliant. There was dumb luck. Fear of inflation turned out to be pseudo wrong, not totally, as we've talked about. But it didn't play out the way I thought, but the commodity run played out beautifully. So my best investing decade ever was the noughts. Not in terms of absolute dollars. I had actually a triple digit year or two in the 90s when I was a tech bull. But so that was much better. But during the noughts, I made 13% compounded annually while everyone else was getting their balls ground to dust. And so that was my good most on a curve best decade
through
commodities.
Through the commodities. Gotcha. What about your worst year or your worst trade, biggest blunder?
Oh, the teens for me. So I missed the equity roid rage. So if you look at historical fair value, we were at about historical fair value and a little bit below it for about a month in 09. I think it was late 08 or early 09. So if you look at, again, historical metrics, I had dinner one night with Mark Spitznagel, and he concurred, and Jeremy Grantham concurred. So I'm not a lone nut on this. There might be 3 lone nuts, but I'm not alone. And so even though we fell from 50,000 feet, we didn't actually hit the earth at the depths of despair in 08, 09. So a real correction from here, in my opinion, is about a 60, 70% correction. To truly correct the valuations, you not only have to drop 60 or 70%, you have to not then spike back up, or you've achieved nothing. So a real correction,
like we did in 2020.
Like we did in 2020, yeah. And so a real correction. So I don't think you can get a V bounce and call it a correction. And I'm not sure we're going to get a V bounce now. I think the age of V bounces might have ended with the end of the 40-year credit cycle, which I believe is over. So I believe that 1981 to 2020, 21, whatever, that was a disinflationary, I hate to use that word because it implies something else, but a steady, methodically, monotonously dropping interest rate environment for 40 years. That will drive asset prices like crazy. I believe it's over. I believe it will be decades before we get another one like that, if ever. And that drove. And so if interest rates slowly but surely grind up by fits and starts, the other asset classes will grind down by fits and starts.
All right, Dave. Well, I think we're closing up on time. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Closing thoughts. If you want to understand the world that we're looking at, I think you have to come at it from a different angle. When Matt Taibbi was investigating the world in 07, 08, 09, and he had gone from being just some reporter to the vampire squid guy, there was a critical moment where someone said, "You're treating this wrong. It's not a financial problem. It's a crime problem." And that's when it clicked with Taibbi. I think this is not about finance. This is not about woke. This is a rising authoritarianism problem. And so if you want to understand what you're seeing, I think you have to start reading about what authoritarianism does as it rises, what it looks like, what the population experiences. So you read, I'll give you some real rapid fire books. Eric Hoffer, The True Believer. Hannah Arendt wrote about totalitarianism and rose and led to the Holocaust. Michael Malice's book is surprisingly good on the rise, on the what happened in the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin and how they totally consumed themselves. And books like that, and neuropsych books, and books that make you understand why. I had a brief chat yesterday with Gad Sad, who gave a talk here. And I said, how did this happen? Where did this come from? Because we're really experiencing a bizarre confluence of events in society. You know, the younger generation, they're a bunch of Marxists, best I can tell. And he said, it's just kind of a perfect storm. I'm not quite positive. He dismissed the idea that China was helping stir it up. I think they are. But you have to read about stuff like that. I think in the hallmarks of authoritarianism, someone said two, I think there's a third. One is confusion. This next is demoralization of the populace. And a subset of the demoralization is that the bad guys do what they do garishly. So like, we know the southern border is a mess. We know they're letting them through. They don't care. So they're kind of gaslighting us. So another way of saying gaslighting, right? And they don't care. And in fact, one could argue the reason they don't care is because they actually do care. They want us to feel like we have no control. COVID response, Ukraine, right? If the populace were allowed to vote on Ukraine, we'd vote every penny to be locked down. As a democratic society, we would vote ourselves out of that Ukraine conflict, vote ourselves out of NATO, in my opinion. But they do it garishly, and part of that goes back to demoralization. You reach a point where you say, no matter what I say, no matter what people know, we're still going to get Biden. We're still going to get, if you're on the other team, Trump. Yeah, no matter who you hate, we're going to get it. And so I would say start reading about authoritarianism. Pay attention to that. And technocracy is a buzzword. There's a book called Technocracy by Patrick Wood. I think it is Patrick Wood. You seem to know that book. The Sovereign Individual. There's a whole bunch of these books that have tried to warn us. I think the internet. I used to say the internet was democracy's greatest hope and worst enemy. And I think we're losing. I think it's becoming our worst enemy. I think it's too powerful for these bad guys to leave alone. And so I think central bank digital currencies are going to be so bad if they show up. The surveillance state, everything is bleak. And so then the question is, can you keep your chin high enough up to actually make a difference? And I don't know. I'm reading about stuff that's so dark now that it's taken it out of me. I talk to people about it, but it's just really tough stuff.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Dave, we appreciate you coming
Have a
on.
ball.
Yeah. Keeping things light and, very
Fluffy.
positive.
Skittles, rainbows,
Yep.
unicorns.
Exactly. So if you guys enjoyed this content, be sure to give it a like, comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree or disagree with any of our takes here today? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next episode. Oh, wait, Dave, I forgot to ask you, what are your socials?
Oh, I'm at David B. Collum on Twitter. Once a year I write a document, but it's my pinned tweet, so that takes you back to David B. Collum. If for some reason you want to hear just an infinite loop of my thoughts, you just go on YouTube and search my name, and you can just find. I'm podcasting as happened today. I went to the wrong podcast link, and you were sitting around waiting for me to show up. And I have a rule: one podcast per day. That's not to say every day is one, but I've had days where 3 people tried to get, and I go, no, I can't do that. My brain won't work right. And so, why I don't know. No, I'm sort of I'm just Joe Sixpack. And what I know is not from some deep-seated life experience. I'm just sitting there looking at the world, going, "Fuck, look at that! Oh,
no, you're an observer.
Look at that. I'm an observer. I got a good bullshit meter. I think I'm contrarian. I am willing to go against. This comes from my professional career. I can sit there and look at 10 experts who tell me they all agree, and I can say you're all full of shit. Very few people can do that.
Yeah, discernment is key, especially in today's age of deception. I mean, there's deception no matter where you look. You've got so many entities, institutions, organizations that are trying to sway you in their direction. And
well, you know that psych experiment where they have a plant, they have a bunch of plants and one guy, and they say which is the longest arrow, and there's clearly one that's longer than the others, and everyone else says the wrong answer, and they all agree, and the guy at the end gives the wrong answer. I go, there's no chance that's me. I would fuck up the experiment by sitting back and saying, you guys are out of your fucking minds, right? There's no, I do not go with the flow. And so I guess that's why I guess that's why I do a lot of podcasts, because I'm unfiltered. I tell my class shit I shouldn't tell them. They don't want to hear it sometimes, I think. I told them the other day, I said, you guys have no sense of humor. They said, why do you say that? And I said, because humor has an edge, always. I said, your generation doesn't like the edge. You think that no one should ever feel any discomfort. And I said, well, you listen to a stand-up comedian. Someone's getting wailed on at all times.
Yep.
And they don't like that. That's not fair.
Well, my audience enjoys you, Dave, which is why we had a pretty high turnout the last time you came on. So there's a group on the internet that enjoys your commentary. So there's always that. Well, at some point I will become stale and old and ready to be put out to pasture. But so far we're wobbling along on my 2 feet. All right. Well, hey, like the video down below, comment down below. Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed Dave's assessment, if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments down below. Share this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.